Hello, everybody. I'm here at Clintondale Middle School in Mr. Steffler's room, and we are going to talk about the Chapter 20 test having to do with African Americans at mid-century. What is going to be due tomorrow is your workbook pages 140 and 141, 142 and 143, and then the map assignment that is located on page 144, which is also on page 273 of the textbook. So those assignments are going to be due also with your concept map tomorrow. So if you have any questions on that, hit me up here on Edmodo. But let's start with the test review. One of the things that most often is kind of confusing for the students is many of the students think if the African Americans escaped the South, then they had a great life in the North. Two things about that. One thing is that most African Americans experienced some type of segregation and discrimination in the North as well as the South. Also, the fugitive slave law made it so that African Americans never felt safe, like they never could fully escape slavery because of this fugitive slave law. So they definitely just had a huge disadvantage dealing with discrimination and racism both in the North and the South. I think slavery really took off in this country after the invention of the cotton gin. A lot of my students think that this made the life easier for the slave. What made it easier was to produce cotton, and the easier cotton production was, the more slaves were necessary, and the more slaves were necessary, the more slave families were pulled apart. So the invention of the cotton gin did a lot of damage to the country as far as the expansion of slavery and forcing this issue of will the slaves go into the West, which is really the root cause of the Civil War. Basically, most people in the South supported slavery, especially because slavery was the lifeblood of the economy. The Southern economy depended on the slaves picking the cotton. Everyone from the basic craftsperson to bankers to any person in the South depended on that cotton trade to make a living in some way. Slaveholders used to control their slaves without using any bars, without using any fences. A lot of the control mechanisms were like harsh punishments for running away, treating their slaves like grown-up children, especially this dependence angle. They controlled the food, they controlled the families, the slaves' families. So they never were trying to tempt the slave with anything. They treated the slaves with nothing but contempt. So they weren't ever giving the slaves an option to, well, if you work hard, we'll free you. That was never an option. The majority of slaves, as you know, worked as field hands, working on cotton, picking the cotton, processing the cotton, baling the cotton, moving the cotton, things of this nature. A lot of slaves resisted slavery by simply just not working, faking sick, breaking tools. I mean, we had Nat Turner's slave rebellion and the rebellion of in South Carolina there. But really, the slave rebellions were few and far between, and even running away was so dangerous and so scary to most slaves that most of the resistance that happened on the plantation was just basically not doing the work. Slaves gathered in these invisible churches to try to give themselves hope. I mean, slavery was a hopeless situation. You never hoped to have anything better than you had. There was nothing to work towards in slavery, which just was a really sad part of it. Like in America, most of us realize that if you work hard, you will get something out of it. The slaves didn't have that American dream. Like they couldn't work hard and work themselves into their own farm. Like that wasn't happening. So a lot of slaves went to these invisible churches because the scripture gave them comfort, especially the scripture talking about Moses and the escape from the Egyptians. The last thing is African traditions followed the slaves across the ocean on the slave ships. Quilting was very popular in Africa as it was in America. Also, folk tales were very popular. The spiritual songs, things of this nature, dance. These are the things that they brought across to try to help keep their lives as stable as possible in a very unstable world. Your test is 13 questions. There will be an excerpt placed on Edmodo that is from Frederick Douglass's book. That's going to be asked about, so I would read that if I were you. Good luck studying tonight, and God bless America.